All right, let's dive into the pretty unsettling and honestly profound world of Recursive Nightmare. It's a story that takes us deep, deep into the mind of a man who literally cannot wake up. So, we meet our protagonist, a systems architect ironically named Dreamer Venn, on what his little wrist counter says is his 293rd waking. And just to be clear, that's not his 293rd day. Nope, it's his 293rd time waking up into the exact same perfectly wrong morning. Right from the very first line, you know something is deeply off. The alarm doesn't just ring, it remembers to ring. You see, this world isn't real. It's a construct, a fabrication built from the memory of a morning. And it feels, as Venn puts it, perfectly, murderously correct. So how do you fight back against something like that? Well, Venn's a systems architect, right? So he does what he knows best. He builds a system, a super meticulous checklist to try and find the cracks, the seams in his fabricated reality. And this table just perfectly captures his whole predicament. He tests the coffee. It tastes like the concept of coffee, a flat summary. Total fail. But then a dog on the street behaves with this convincing randomness. That passes. The towel even has the right scratchy roughness from hard water. Passed. But then the crack in the ceiling, it's too perfect. It's exactly the same every single time. Suspicious. So he's trapped in this maddening ambiguity where some details feel totally real and others are just cheap copies. And as the loops pile up, the horror, it evolves. It gets personal. At first, it's physical. His body just dissolves. Then the nightmare starts attacking his memories, rewriting them in these subtle, cruel ways. And finally, in the later stages, the nightmares become these terrifyingly accurate descriptions of his own trap. The line between the dream and the reality of his situation just completely blurs. But here's the thing. Venn isn't totally alone in this maze. Two figures show up, and they both offer him a way out. The only problem, their maps of his reality, of this labyrinth, could not be more different. And this is just so interesting. You've got this fundamental conflict in their approaches. On one side, you have Aldous Frey, the technician. He sees a technical problem, nested layers, dreams within dreams, like floors in a building. His goal? Extraction. Let's just peel back the layers and get you out. But on the other side is Sable, the academic. She sees a totally different geometry, a philosophical problem. She says the goal isn't extraction, it's orientation. Sable's model is a total mindbender. She suggests Venn isn't in a stack of dreams, he's on a Klein bottle. Now, this is a theoretical, one-sided surface. Think of it like a Mobius strip, but in 3D. If you walk along its surface, you eventually just loop back to where you started, but you never actually cross a boundary. Why? Because there's no inside to get outside of. So this leads to Sable's most devastating idea. The trap isn't the loop, the recursion itself. The real trap is the very assumption that you're supposed to be trying to get out. That desperate struggle to escape, that's what's actually keeping him imprisoned. And this right here, this is the pivot for the entire story. Because this is where we find out that this complex, nightmarish trap, it isn't a technical glitch. It's not an external prison at all. It's a psychological fortress that Venn built himself. We're shifting from the what of the trap to the why. Frey, the technician, he eventually reveals the truth. Venn isn't being held captive by some outside force. He's hiding. He's dreaming over and over and over again to avoid waking up to an unbearable truth that's waiting for him in the real world. And that unbearable truth is the memory of his son. The entire complex, almost 300-layer deep nightmare is a fortress he built to wall off the grief of losing his 7-year-old son, Kale, in an accident. And this line, this is the key that unlocks absolutely everything. The shape of the avoidance is the shape of the thing being avoided. Just think about that. In almost 300 nightmares, full of every conceivable horror, Venn has never once dreamed of Kyle. The entire structure of his prison is built around that massive, profound, silent absence. So this revelation, it leads to the emotional climax of the whole story. It triggers a dream that's, well, it's finally not a nightmare. It's something else entirely, a breakthrough that isn't an escape. So he finds himself at a field from his childhood. And there's Kyle. But he isn't 7. He's older, an unresolved age, kind of representing the future Venn will never get to know. And he holds out this rock with a fossil in it. And he just looks at his father and says, "It's okay."
And in that moment, for the very first time, Venn doesn't try to escape his grief. He doesn't try to fix it. He just stands in its presence.
So after this dream, what happens? He's still in the recursion. He hasn't woken up. But his entire perspective, the very meaning of his prison, has been completely transformed.
His wrist counter clicks over. 298. But that number, it no longer represents the depth of his prison. It's not a tally of his failures anymore. You see, before, the counter was just evidence of his entrapment. It was a measure of his imprisonment. But after, it becomes a form of attention. He reclaims the act of counting. He remembers how his son used to stand at the window and count lightning bolts during a storm. Not with fear, but with focus. It was a way of being present. And so, the counting becomes a form of love.
And this quote just captures his breakthrough perfectly. He says the recursion feels less like a trap and more like a room he's been in for a long time. I know where everything is. I'm not afraid of the corners. You see, the goal wasn't never to leave the room. It was to learn how to live in it without being afraid.
And that's when he finally understands. The trap was never the looping nightmare itself. The real trap was the relentless, desperate belief that escape was the only possible answer. Once he stops fighting to get out, the architecture of his nightmare, well, it just becomes a structure, a memory of a journey. So the story leaves us with this really powerful thought to chew on. What happens when the goal isn't to escape the maze, but to finally turn around and understand why you built it in the first place?